Let's be real, 13 Reasons Why is not an easy show to watch by any stretch of the imagination. It is, however, an excellently made television show, which is why I have scoured through all 13 one-hour long episodes to pull out 13 lessons that 13 Reasons Why teaches us about filmmaking. Welcome to Remedial Media 101. Class is now in session. Lesson number 1, it's possible to cast good actors who actually look like they're the right age for their roles. Sure, Dylan Minnette, who plays Clay, is technically 21 and is technically playing a 15 or 16-year-old, however, he looks like he fits the role. I'm kinda sick of filmmakers being lazy and just casting clearly adult people to play high schoolers. Do it right, and do it the way 13 Reasons Why does it. Lesson number 2, it's possible to make episodes that are interconnected without making them completely interdependent. I love the way each episode introduces small kind of background elements that you won't necessarily notice, which then resurface and are significant elements of the next or future episodes. It means that if you watch it through all in one sitting, you'll get this really cool interconnected picture, but it also means that you don't have to do it that way and you can still understand what's going on in each independent episode. Lesson 3, this show is a fantastic example of how to integrate memory into the narrative of a production. I love the way that shots are able to bleed straight from the present into the past or vice versa. It really sells the idea that characters are getting lost in their own heads and being instantly transported rather than some kind of jarring, wavy transition effect or any of those other traditional memory tropes. The other element that the show uses expertly to its advantage in portraying those memories is the power of color temperature. Sure, this is definitely not the most subtle aspect of the show. The present day is very blue and cold and distant looking, whereas the past is warmer colors and more friendly and kind of more welcoming. But its lack of subtlety does not in any way diminish its effectiveness in portraying the very different mindset of people in the past and the present. In short, color temperature is a very powerful thing when used properly and deliberately. Another lesson that those memories can teach us is number 5, how to use an unreliable narrator in film. I've always found it odd that the concept of narration is so thoroughly talked about in literature, but very rarely talked about in filmmaking aside from literal voiceover narration, which is almost always considered to be a bad thing, especially if you're CinemaSins. However, every story is told from someone's viewpoint, and that character's viewpoint necessarily has an impact upon what is presented to the audience. In 13 Reasons Why, we actually have 2 layers of narration where Hannah is narrating her tapes and her own viewpoint on what happened in those tapes. Clay is then hearing her narration and presenting his own fairly skewed perception of how those tapes relate to the real world. This nested approach is used to great effect both to draw the audience into the emotion of each and every scene while still presenting the fact that we're maybe not quite sure that what we're seeing is happening is actually what happened. And this is a necessary element of any suspense or mystery related production. Our next 3 lessons, that's 6, 7, and 8, are all related to the various ways that this show tells its story in a very effective way. Lesson 6, the story is often driven solely by the actions of the characters, not by their words. If there's one thing that drives me crazy, it's when characters in a film or television show are constantly explaining to each other what they think and what they feel about a certain situation. See, the visual media are unique because they, have visuals. We're able to see the expressions of a character and the body language of a character and all of those elements that contribute emotion and meaning to the viewer in ways that mere words can't. Of course, that requires that you actually have to trust your actors and that they be of a high enough caliber to convey those kinds of meanings to the audience, but 13 Reasons Why definitely succeeds in that regard. And the second aspect of this show's storytelling that I very much appreciated is its coherent and cohesive presentation of one storytelling package. Essentially, every little background detail and piece of seemingly irrelevant dialogue and audio that you hear, all of these different elements are all there for a reason. Whether it's a poster on the wall in the background or something that one of the teachers says that's kind of out of earshot but you can still pick up on, or just some throwaway line from maybe one of the secondary characters. All of those elements at first seem like simple world building if you don't really think about them too in depth, but once you start to take the overall philosophical message of the show and fit those other pieces into it, you realize that everything is helping to tell this story. The result is engrossing and captivating and just good. I don't need fancy words. It's just good. Lesson number 8, and my final commentary on the overall storytelling quality of 13 Reasons Why, is to comment on how well the camera is used to tell the story visually. This kind of overlaps and intersects with my earlier comments on the visual storytelling quality of the show. However, I think it's important to comment specifically on how well the camera is used. This is a show in large part about isolation and separation, and the visuals constantly reinforce that by focusing on one character and then driving everyone else out of the frame by adjusting or zooming or any of those sorts of motions. Certainly there are plenty of other productions that have used this same kind of technique. It's not the most original, but it's still very compelling and worth being noted because I see plenty of visual productions where no thought is given to how the camera moves and is used. In short, the camera is not just something used to capture what the actors are doing, it can very often be an actor itself, and 13 Reasons Why takes that to heart. Lesson number 9 is one of my personal favorites, and that is that the show is not afraid to withhold character details until they naturally come up in the plot. I hate contrived dialogue and forced exposition, and those two things often exist because filmmakers feel compelled to introduce us to every single little element of a character's character right off the bat when we first meet them. This simply isn't necessary. Just like in real life, you don't know everything about a person the first time you see them, and allowing the audience to discover a character over the course of a show results in a much more believable and realistic character arc. Not to mention the fact that it ditches all of that really clunky and forced dialogue. Of course, I think this is most effective in a production like 13 Reasons Why, where it's kind of mystery / suspense driven, so you need to have that kind of dribble of what was this character doing and what were their motivations. But I'm not talking about just plot points. I mean, kind of fundamental character attributes are not revealed until they come up naturally. And that's a very refreshing change of pace from the norm. And another refreshing change of pace is lesson number 10, that the show respects the audience to remember things and figure things out on their own. Rather than constantly rehashing the events of previous episodes or the relationships of characters or any of those sorts of elements, 13 Reasons Why is content to present the information once and then trust that the audience remembers it. Of course, this could be because it was designed to be binge-watched in one sitting, so they don't really think you're gonna be forgetting anything. But I wish that more shows had enough confidence in their audiences to know that they don't need to wrap up everything with a neat little bow at the very end. Lesson number 11, I think that this show does an excellent job of presenting characters who actually have some nuance. Yes, you have protagonists and antagonists, and to some extent good guys and bad guys, but overall, every character does some things right. All of the characters definitely do some things wrong. A lot of things wrong. So many things wrong. But all of it feels real, and because their characters are developed in such an effective way, as I mentioned earlier, you feel how their actions stem from their characters. It's far more believable than your normal goody two-shoes and super duper villain kind of setup. Number 12, I'm amazed at how well 13 Reasons Why is able to use its structure to reinforce the impact that the characters' emotions have on the audience's emotions. In other words, we feel what they are feeling. Also, just a warning, from here on out, I'm going to be talking about the very end of the show, which is also by far the most painful and most mature aspect of it. So this is your chance to go somewhere else. You see, the whole show, we're well aware of the fact that Hannah has committed suicide, but we never really have any details about it. There's just some kind of general descriptions. We have an idea of what went down, but nothing particular. At the same time, none of the characters are ever really willing to address their emotions or Hannah's suicide completely openly and upfront. Their emotions are hidden from us, and so the suicide is hidden from us. But in the climax of the show, Clay goes to Mr. Porter, the school guidance counselor, and he confronts him 100% openly about Hannah's tapes, the suicide, her emotions, the failings of everybody at the school and in the town. And that scene is intercut with an incredibly graphic depiction of Hannah's suicide. I'm gonna be honest, I couldn't watch that part. I was staring through my closed fingers the entire time, and it has been rightly criticized for perhaps being too graphic. However, the point is very clear that this is an impossibly difficult thing to watch and to experience, and we experience it at the exact same time that the characters in the show are finally forced to confront it. This is an unbelievable example of structure reinforcing story, and while it's so hard to watch, it's such a great lesson to be learned about film. filmmaking. That brings us to lesson 13, which I believe is the most important lesson that can be taught to us by 13 Reasons Why. However, that's gonna have to wait for 2 weeks from now when I give it an episode all its own, because I have way too much to say about it to fit into this episode, which is already way longer than I was hoping it would be. So click that subscribe button to make sure you do not miss part 2 of this episode, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Class dismissed.